and I have to do something to my vehicle, probably tires.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean bigger tires. I think people, in my opinion, move too quickly into wanting to modify a vehicle. If that's the path you want to go to and that's what makes you happy, absolutely, I support and endorse that. But what I think is really good is drive your vehicle stock the way it came from the factory with maybe a slightly better set of tires and understand the capability of that car. Modern cars can do amazing things right out the gate before you even touch them. Honestly, if you do that, you'll be a better driver in the long run, and you will probably spend less money on fixing your vehicle because you've started with the core skills with the vehicle as it is stock, if that makes sense.
Warning. The 4x4 Canada podcast contains discussion about exploring mountains, camping beside lakes, and enjoying the outdoors. Guests also talk about jumping race trucks side by side, racing 1,000 horsepower rigs across mud pits, and jumping monster trucks over stacks of buses. None of this is for the faint of heart. The 4x4 Canada podcast is not responsible for bringing out your inner adrenaline junkie or making you want to get out there and explore the back roads from coast to coast. The 4x4 Canada podcast is not responsible for broken parts due to jumping your vehicle, hitting mud poles too hard, crossing deep streams, and doing other dumb shit. However, we will take credit for inspiring you to explore mountaintops, spend quality time outdoors with your friends, or meeting new like-minded people, and most importantly of all, following your dreams. Welcome to the 4x4 Canada podcast. I'm your host, Wes.
And I'm your host, Trisha.
My name's Chris Walker, the owner and director of Overland Training Canada.
So happy to have you on, Chris. I know you're a hard guy to nail down. You're bouncing all over the world. So really, really appreciate you taking the time. You're on a flight for like 5 a.m. in the morning. So this is really, really exciting to have you on. Before we get started, I do want to thank everyone for listening. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, make sure to subscribe, follow, and all those other little things that they call it in each individual podcast app. And please recommend it to your friends. We've been doing this for a little bit over a year and have some really neat things planned for the next year. If you are new here, we highly recommend going back and listening to some of the older episodes. We have some really great conversations with Canadian monster truck drivers, off-road racers, YouTube stars, and of course, Canadian 4x4 companies. And definitely go right back to episode number 1 with Mike Tishkin from Unexpected Off-Road. He needs 2 more subscribers on his YouTube channel to hit his 1,000 mark. So please go back and check out his interview, the very, very first interview with him, and go check him out on the Unexpected Off-Road on YouTube. And you can see why he's called Unexpected Off-Road, because he actually drives an H2 Hummer off-road. And it's not something you normally see off-road. So great guy, even though he is a transplanted American. We still do love him and we treat him like a Canadian. So he's a great guy. You've met Mike before, right, Chris?
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. I like hanging out with Mike whenever I see him.
Yeah, pretty chill guy. So once again, Chris, thank you for coming on. I know that you're bouncing all over the world, and we know you're from your company, Overland Training Canada, which provides driver and recovery training across North America. We'll put it in the show notes, but people can reach you on your website at Overland Training, as well as Overland Training Canada on the socials like Instagram and Facebook.
Absolutely. Yep.
So really want to get into talking about the training that you guys do in that, and I know that you're the director for Overland Vehicle Training for the Overland Expo events, as well as you're involved in the Rebelle Rally, and you're working on the TransGlobal Car Expedition. And sometime in there, you actually spend time to have a couple hours of sleep. You got a lot going on, dude.
If only you knew. And that's just scratching the surface. But that was a good little snapshot, that's for sure.
Good. I know that you didn't just wake up one day and decide to start teaching people how to drive off-road. Did you grow up 4x4ing and exploring? Like, you obviously didn't grow up in Canada based on your accent. But did you grow up on Land Rovers and stuff like that over there, or what?
You know, I came into 4x4 off-road driving in a roundabout way. So I grew up in the UK. I immigrated to Canada 17 and a half years ago, nearly 18 years ago. But I grew up in a family that was really based in adventure education, outdoor education, mountaineering, climbing, ice climbing, kayaking, whitewater kayaking, sailing, all those good things. That's a really big core ethos in school education in the UK. I realized that was an avenue that I wanted to follow in life as well as recreation. So I went to university, have a degree in sports science, performance coaching, adventure education. I worked at 4 national centers of excellence. So we have in the UK a handful of outdoor centers based under like school districts. And then we also have centers of excellence like the National Mountaineering Center, the National Whitewater Sports Center, the National Water Sports Center, that really focus on high-level education for teaching people to be teachers or instructors and to teach the higher-level folks like the fire service, the mountaineers, the police, the search and rescue folks on their craft in the outdoors. And that became a big, big passion of mine. In terms of vehicles, I've traveled all over the place with my passion as a professional kayaker when I was younger. I lived in Iceland for 2 years. I lived in Norway for 2 years. And just the nature of the places that I would go explore would require needing some kind of transport. Yes, I'm British, so yes, I have a love affair with the perpetual oil changes that come along with Land Rovers. I go back to the UK a lot, and there's those old Land Rovers and Range Rovers and old Toyotas and various other bits of interesting machinery still kicking around the UK, and that's where my love affair started. Really, it was probably Iceland. The nature of what I was doing in Iceland required that we would travel off-road in certain places to get to rivers or mountains or whatever we were doing. A huge passion for what the Icelandics do, especially people like Arctic trucks.
Yep.
I then moved to North America, and I started working very quickly in the snowcat industry, especially for Whistler Blackcomb and a variety of other companies, operating winch snowcats, teaching people to drive snowcats, that kind of stuff. I then became the safety manager or liaison for Whistler Blackcomb and Jaguar Land Rover when they did the launch of the Range Rover Evoque in 2010, 2011. And that was based in Vancouver and on Blackcomb Mountain. So I was their liaison. And then throughout that relationship, during that week-long program, I became a good friend with the person who was then the manager or the person who was in charge of the Land Rover Experience, the mobile training team for North America, Bob Burns, an amazing guy, kind of a long-time hero and mentor of mine. Got asked to join their team for training Land Rover consumers, press drives, ride and drives, all sorts of stuff. And I saw this niche alongside with that no one was really providing education in off-highway travel, so Jeeps, Land Rovers, pickup trucks, heavy-duty trucks, snowmobiles, snowcats, that kind of stuff. There's little bits and pieces with snowmobiles and ATVs in North America, but very little. And I come from a background of education where all of that stuff is really prevalent. So I saw the niche. And as you say, here we are.
The rest is history.
Wow.
So that's quite the education. I mean, going through all those steps and going back to that a little bit, and I don't know if it really relates to now or to earlier in your life, or if it's more into currently, but off air, you mentioned being a member of the Royal Geologic Society and the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. What are those organizations, and were you part of them earlier in your life as well?
No, so it's the Royal Canadian Geographic Society and the Royal Geographic Society. One's based in the UK, one's based in Canada. They're a professional organization that supports education and funding and expeditions and travel in the field of geography. Now, to become a fellow of those organizations, you need to be nominated. I was nominated by a handful of people to become a fellow of each organization. And it's a great, great, great privilege. I mean, it's a lifelong dream to be a fellow of the Royal Geographic Society. I mean, it's one of the most synonymous or most iconic professional organizations based out of the UK. I mean, their halls are hallowed with people that have been to Everest first, been around the globe, sailed across the seas, but with a big emphasis on geography. Because of my background in education, especially outdoor education, which is based a lot around using geography to understand geology, to understand the weather, to understand conditions, social and economic geographical factors, and the way that we look to travel, that's really part of the reason why I got nominated and yeah, it's a huge honor.
Yeah, I was going to say that's like a lifetime achievement thing
Wow.
kind of
100%.
idea, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And then there was a nomination with the Explorers Club, which is another similar professional organization based out of the US and New York there and there. Again, the people that walk those society or club buildings, oh my gosh, staggering in name. Chris Bonington, Tenzing and Norgay, all those kind of high level, world famous explorers.
to be in the same organization or to be grouped in the same group with those people is, lifetime achievement idea for sure. So, so let's hop back into some of the work that you do with Overland Training Canada.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just a training company for helping people with driving techniques and recovery. You do that, and that you do hold courses for people, and we'll get into that in a bit of a second. But you've also got your hands, as we mentioned earlier, you've also got your hands into the Overland Expo series. You've got your hands in the Rebelle Rally. You're bouncing all over the place. I mean, you were at the Overland North event in Ontario this summer, and that's where Trisha met you, along with your cohort Richard there. And so you're kind of into a little bit of everything, it seems. So let's first talk about the Overland Expo. We all know what the Overland Expo is, and it's probably the largest series of overland events in North America. Very well known, very, very tons and tons of people. And from my understanding, you're the overland vehicle training director, I guess, for all other events. What does that mean, and what does that entail?
Okay, so I ended up at Overland Expo many years ago at one of their old locations through Land Rover on an event that they were hosting during the Overland Expo back in the day. I immediately became enthralled with what that event was. And then I ended up, where did I go from there? I ended up with another company based out of the US who were at the time running the training for Overland Expo. So I spent many years with them teaching on their team, doing a variety of other bits of teaching. Then their relationship finished, just normal business practice, just things move on, things evolve, different opportunities. Amazing friends of mine, great instructors. But then the opportunity arose where they moved on from their relationship with Overland Expo. And within 12 hours, I get a phone call from Overland Expo being told that I should take this job of director of training for Overland Expo without much choice. And
you're going to do it and you're going to like it.
Yeah, I knew what I was getting into, but the phone call was a little bit of a surprise. I had a little inclination that things were changing just because of my great relationship with the people that were previously running the training. But yeah, I got cornered and the rest is history. So now I run the vehicle-based training for Overland Expo at their events, where we take pass holders, consumers, visitors to Overland Expo through a large handful of training opportunities at the event. In 22, 23, we had 18 instructors on my team with 200 to 300 people passing through the education at most of the events there. And it's anything from basic vehicle maintenance to understanding your vehicle, to understanding systems, to right the way through to more complex driving, more complex field repairs, to simple to complex vehicle recovery. It's all consumer based and it's all recreation based. That's the focus on it.
Yeah. And I haven't been to one of the bigger Overland Expo events in the States, but I have been to other Overland style events in BC and Alberta and that. And I know at those they held little seminars. So whether it be, how to use a winch properly, or they have the obstacle course and, the Rebelle Rally, she had her mapping courses and stuff like that. Is that sort of the same idea that you guys do at the Overland Expo, but just in a different scale?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, when Jonathan and Roseanne started Overland Expo back in the day, it started off very similar to BC Overland Rally or Northwest Overland Rally. And those two rallies as well are kind of the originals of this whole industry, along with Overland Expo. I mean, Ray and Mario for BC and Northwest are two of the father figures in the whole industry, alongside Jonathan and Roseanne and a handful of other folks. And the Overland Expo, I think it's probably partly fueled by US consumerism. I think there's just a bigger market. So it quickly fueled itself into being a much bigger event. I mean, you look at Overland Expo West these days, you're into the high 20,000s, nearly 30,000 visitors to that show. It's a very, very different style of show. I think Overland Expo is fantastic, and it's a big consumer show, lots and lots of amazing vendors, lots of opportunities, lots of talks. But then when you take the smaller shows like the ones out in Ontario and Northwest and BC Overland Rally, that's almost like grassroots. That's where people get their time to hang out and have a beer or have a coffee and chat and look around each other's vehicles. That stuff goes on at the bigger event, but it's not as easy to be as familiar or friendly as it is at the smaller events.
Yeah, I've heard from from my friends that gone down to the Overland West. It's a great event. It's a huge event. It's fun, but it's missing something that the smaller events have sometimes, right? So
yeah, and I think that's just the nature of the size of the event. I mean, Overland Expo West is just it's awe-inspiring how big it is, and it's almost overwhelming because there's so much to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Rebelle Rally is coming up in about a week. It's an event that takes place in the U.S. deserts, where it's all female teams who complete a rally, where there are basically no electronic, I guess, anything, right? Like no GPS, and you're just relying on maps and coordinates. And there've been some incredible Canadian teams competing. And early last November, Wes interviewed the Positivity team, which they're from BC in West Kelowna. They won the international category. So you have, I guess, somewhat involvement or like a big involvement with the Rebelle Rally, right?
I do. It's fairly significant, actually. Although during the event, when you look at how the event's played out, I play a small role in comparison to the amazing women that compete in the event. So Emily Miller, the owner of the event, is a very good friend of mine, close friend.
Okay.
I am one of her instructors for the Rebelle Rally, one of her official instructors, so I get to travel to their official trainings. I'm also allowed to conduct training on their behalf. Mm-hmm. The other part, which is probably the really exciting part to my life, is I'm one of the safety team and I'm one of the main media drivers throughout the event. So all that means really in a nutshell is that I get to go and spend close to 2 weeks with the Rebelle Rally every October on the event, working behind the scenes, making sure that the event goes off without a hitch. This year, I think it's 65 teams.
Yeah. So this year I was reading there's 65 teams, women coming from 100 cities, 28 states, and 3 countries. Like how? Like that's crazy. It's like mind blowing.
It really is. But that comes from the power of what Emily believes in, her history and her background. I mean, she came from a big desert racing background or desert competing background herself. She's competed in Africa and Morocco, down in Baja. She was an instructor with Rod Hall, who's the most winning Baja competitor of all time. His granddaughter, actually a really, really good close friend of mine, Shelby Hall, is a Rebelle instructor, and she's an instructor on my team for Overland Expo. So Emily comes from this really big pedigree of driving in the desert, navigating. She's a genius with maps and compasses. So she had this vision to set up this event to empower women to get out there and do something a little differently on amazing lands throughout the US. And it's, roughly 2,000 miles, 8 days of competition over 10 days through the deserts of California, Nevada, and Arizona, depending on which way the course goes.
Amazing. And I was looking at I guess previous pictures. They're doing all these, I guess I should say, maps and obstacles and going through the deserts and different terrains. And it's also camping as well, right? So at the end of the day, you're camping at the end of it, or you're camping throughout?
Yes, let's put it into context. So the navigation part of it, you're 100% correct. They're not allowed any electronic aids. We take their phones, their computers. They get sealed away for the event, so they're completely off-grid. Okay. All they have is every morning they get given a sheet with the coordinates and the checkpoints that they have the opportunity of checking into that day. Okay. They then have to plot them that morning on the map that they're going to use, or maps they're going to use for the day. Right. And they use their compass and their map to navigate between each of those checkpoints. Green checkpoints are huge, big green flags, and they're manned by course workers for safety and a variety of other reasons. Little blue flags or little blue stakes are less visible.
Mm.
And then we have a handful of black checkpoints, single black or double black checkpoints, which are completely invisible. There's nothing on the surface of the earth that denotes that they're there. But they all play into different amounts of points
Right.
that the women can accumulate throughout the competition. So it's nothing to do with speed. It's to do with accuracy and good driving. And it's fantastic. And answering your question about camping, the reason why I had a little sly grin on my face is every year is a little bit differently. So we are based at several base camps throughout the competition. Those base camps are big, huge operations with remote tenting out in the middle of the desert somewhere that we bring in. We bring in infrastructure where there's water. There's a Michelin star chef, Drew Deckman, from originally a U.S. chef but based in Mexico. Amazing guy who makes 3 meals a day. There's media rooms. There's handful of Starlink uplinks for all the media outlets. There's live broadcasts. There's a full mobile garage. There's full mobile fueling. There's all sorts. However, in conjunction with that, and I can't say too much because of the way the competition unfolds, is there are what we call marathon camps.
Okay.
And those marathon camps are interspersed between the big camps where the women will navigate throughout the day, and they may end up at a marathon camp, which is a remote camp with almost no facilities, but in a BLM campsite where there might be porta potties, that kind of stuff. Then they may end up at the base camps the night or two later, depending on how Emily's programmed the competition. So there's a bit of a mixture of both. So they need to be self-sufficient. They have to travel every day with certain safety items to ensure that they're ready for any eventuality, because it's not watered down. They're right out there in proper off-road terrain, often hundreds of kilometers from anywhere. It's the real deal.
That's the real deal.
And it's a variety of terrain too. I mean, there's everything from the sand dunes to rocky, obviously not rock crawling, but rocky materials to everything. So it was funny back when I did the interview with Lisa back in early November last year. The one thing she did say about the tents is you try and get 130 women or 150 women, whatever it is, plus all the staff, and everybody's trying to eat at the same time. And they're, imagine that many women trying to use the facilities and stuff like that, right? So, I mean, she said it's absolutely wonderful job that the whole crew does, but it is quite interesting. But the one thing I do remember clear and loud, she said that at 5 a.m. every morning, the she-devil named Emily Miller comes out with, and is loud. Well, she didn't say she-devil. I called her a she-devil because somebody coming out with a bullhorn or whatever it was at 5 o'clock in the morning. Everybody get up. Yeah.
It's a full-on big cowbell that she rattles around the campsite.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I love it.
The infrastructure is amazing. I mean, the camps come in, the base camps come in a couple of days early because there's such a big infrastructure, but there's potable water. All the gray and black water is removed. Essentially, the ethos behind the whole thing is that when the base camp leaves its location, the location is cleaner than when we arrived.
Yeah.
And that's really important through permitting. It's really important through Tread Lightly. It's really important through the metrics of what's going on out there. It's the places Emily gets us into because of the respect through National Forest, the BLM, that kind of stuff is absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, one of the most inspiring parts for me is the renewable energy that they use. There's a company called Renewable Innovations. They come in with a couple of semi-trucks with these really unique hydrogen generators and these huge solar flowers that power the base camp throughout our time there. So there's no real consumption to produce the power that's required to run the place. It's really, really clever. It's really well thought out.
It's got to be mind-blowing just to walk into something like that, right? So, and sort of on topic, but a little bit off topic, you brought up the solar energy and everything that they use for this. There, over the last few years, has been a number of vehicles come in that have been electric-powered vehicles or battery-powered vehicles. Yep. And I believe there's a special class for them. And we've really started to see some of the vehicle manufacturers come on board as supporters and sponsors in that. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that Lisa, like, they didn't really know a heck of a lot about it. I mean, electric vehicles aren't their thing, right? But she said that, there is facilities there for them to charge overnight and that. So how do you feel, Chris? I mean, you've been in the industry for years. You've been overlanding, you've been exploring for years. What are your thoughts on the electric vehicles used for exploration and overlanding?
I think it's really interesting. I think we're very early in the phase here, but as we all know, the world is being pushed towards electrification, especially in the vehicle market and light truck, medium truck. The technology that's being created out there, I think, is fantastic. I mean, you look at things like Rivian, you look at things like Tesla, there's Volkswagen, Audi, all these people who are putting serious amounts of cash into developing these EV vehicles. There's a big EV designation at the Rebelle Rally that's supported by powering by renewable innovations. Just as a side note, they will sometimes charge on course. Emily and the team who lays out the course is very clever on range. They have a really intricate knowledge with the manufacturers on understanding range in a variety of terrain to ensure success of the competition, safety of the women. So they will look at the stages and they will plug in this renewable innovation system. I mean, it's all pulled by tractor trailer, so they'll move that into a location so they can charge. In terms of answering to your question on what I see EV in terms of travel, I think hybrid is probably a more direct route currently, but it depends on what your travel is. I think in North America, we look at this big grandiose, okay, we're going to travel across the world. We're going to go to Baja. We're going to go all the way down to Ushuaia. Overlanding doesn't necessarily need to be this grand statement. It could be just going out for a few hours from where you are in Kamloops and just going up into Bachelor. And I know an EV vehicle is more than capable of all of those things. In terms of the actual driving, I think EV is going to present us with some really cool, interesting technology that's going to give us even better ability to apply traction, hopefully less impact to the ground because the sensors and the way the electric motors work is a little bit more refined than some gasoline or diesel powered vehicles in the way they put the power down. I think it's just young. I'm excited to see it. My concern with electrification is where do we get the power from to charge these things?
Yeah.
I think there's a big story that I don't understand it enough to provide the best educated answer, but that's kind of my take on it.
I'm sort of along the same idea as you are. I mean, obviously people say, no, there's no infrastructure for that. And you're right. There's not enough infrastructure for immediate things to happen, but it's improving all the time. I mean, you take a look at Highway 5 between, say, Kamloops and Jasper, and there's a number of stops along the way. And even in Kamloops, there's different gas stations being Canadian Tires. I think they've got about 10 or 12 chargers, and the Petrocan up on the hill, they've got another 8 or 10 chargers. And plus all these small towns all the way up into Jasper do have charging stations. And a lot of my friends, we've talked about it, and they're like, it doesn't have the range. It's only got 300 or 400K of range. And I'm like, in reality, how often are we going farther than 400K during a day when we're traveling overland, whether, using Forest Service roads or whatever? And, you can pop into Clinton, of all places, and charge up if you have to. And I've had to pop into Clinton to fuel up. So, it doesn't really, and they're getting faster and faster. You don't have to wait 2 hours for a full charge anymore. You can be a half hour or whatever, right? So I think we're on our way, and I think there's a lot of really, really interesting technology coming. Like you do have some concerns about how we're powering and what we're doing with the lithium mining and stuff like that. I got some concerns on that, but I think the technology is really, really interesting. So
I agree.
It's just a bit of a side note there.
No, it's exciting times. I think as this whole industry has kind of evolved exploded over the last, 5-10 years, it's good to see that the vehicle manufacturers are really stepping on board with this aspect of recreation. I mean, there's this huge advocacy and buy-in for people or manufacturers that are looking to create vehicles and machines that are really pointed at the consumer. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, take a look at the Rivian truck with that option of the slide out from the side that has a full kitchen built into it already, right
Yep.
from the factory. And the
Yep.
fact that you can run your fridge and everything, no problem, because you don't need to have a second battery. You don't need to have another power pack or whatever, right?
Yep.
So there's definitely
Phenomenal
lots of,
vehicle.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I've been following the TransGlobal Car Expedition for the last year or so, and I've been wanting to talk to Andrew Comrie Picard for a while. I got to get a hold of him, and he's, for those of you who don't know, Andrew started off as a rally racer in Canada, and he's won a number of championships. He's done some stuff on TV in regards to working with TV shows about teaching people how to drive properly and stuff like that as well. And he has gotten into this TransGlobal Car Expedition. To me, it's the ultimate expedition. And from my understanding, and I'm sure you'll set me straight on it, but it's basically going around the world instead of going around the center of the world, like through the equator, they're going the other way. They're going, North Pole down to South Pole and back around kind of idea from my understanding. Is that sort of what it is? And if you can fill us a bit more in about it and what your involvement is on it, because I know you've been working a lot with them lately.
Yeah, so first off, Andrew's a fantastic guy. His breadth of knowledge in the automotive industry is huge. I mean, he's like you said, a rally car driver. He's a licensed stunt car driver. He's worked on lots of different shows. He's worked in lots of different organizations. Very, very cool guy. Very, very talented. Very, very smart. Canadian originally. Now lives in LA. So the TransGlobal Car Expedition is an expedition that has been devised by a handful of people to drive around the world, more importantly, going through both poles. So when you look at the route that's being proposed, it's all in a little bit of flux and like finalization of certain sections. All of that route has been driven by explorers, by overlanders, by off-roaders at one point or another. But this trip is putting together a starting point going through the poles by rubber-tired vehicles through the other pole and ending up back where they started. So it starts in January at the Explorers Club in New York. It then heads, there's a Coles notes on the route. It then heads north into Canada, up through Churchill, up into the North Pole, across the North Pole, down across Greenland, across Iceland, probably into Denmark in Europe, and then through Europe, through maybe Eastern Asia, down through Africa, cross via a boat to Antarctica, through the South Pole, cross via a boat to South America, up through South America, Central America, the US, and back into New York, probably the Explorers Club again.
Wow.
So they're using three types of vehicles. They're using, and this will make a few people tilt their heads, I'm sure. They're using 2022 and 2023 Ford Expeditions for the continental sections of the route. I'll come back to the use of the Ford Expeditions because I know there's probably listeners out there wondering, why would you use that? It's for a very good reason. They then transfer in central Canada into Arctic truck, specifically built AT44 4x4 trucks or 6x6 trucks. They then travel to a point I'm not sure of where they switch into their third type of vehicles, the Amelias, which are built by some Russian expedition people that are on this trip, where they drive across the North Pole. I think the Amelias go across Greenland. I can't remember. And then they pick up the Ford Expeditions back in Iceland, all the way through Europe to Africa, pick up the Arctic trucks, 4x4s and 6x6s in Antarctica, across Antarctica, and then back to the expeditions for the Americas. So there's three types of big vehicles.
Very.
God, you got a question?
I'm just Ford Expedition. I don't know.
I think it depends on what country you come from, on what you perceive as what you think is the right vehicle to travel. When you look at Europe and the UK and places like that, it's much smaller vehicles. We don't need Jeeps on 38s. We don't need big expedition style vehicles. Admittedly, yes, we see the Germans and some Dutch people in huge MAN and Volvo Arctic trucks, semi-trucks, traveling the world. But then you take the flip side, you come to North America, and then very quickly, you're almost prescribed, you're almost encouraged that you must get a big vehicle, have a big suspension lift on it, have lots of tires, have winches, have this, that, and the other. The reality is, for most travel in most reasonable places, you don't need a heavily modified vehicle, in my opinion and my experience. So the route that they're choosing is not necessarily the hardest route. They're not looking to cross the hardest sections of the world. They've defined their route as this expedition around the world, going through the poles and linking it all together. So the Ford Expedition is phenomenal. It's big, it's efficient, it's lots of space, it's a modern vehicle. It's actually really capable. The spec version that they have, it has four-wheel drive high range, four-wheel drive low range. It has a whole bunch of traction control, drive modes, and a factory-fitted electronic locking rear differential. They've been modified very basically by Arctic trucks to have a slightly larger set of tires and some lighting and some electrical stuff to go with them. Very simple. So their use case is it doesn't need to be this big modified vehicle. What they're looking for is they're going to travel from Iceland to the tip of South Africa. They need vehicles that are going to move quickly, efficiently, and are going to be comfortable with nice seating and AC and all that kind of stuff. And then the same through the Americas, right? So whilst we sit here tilting our heads of the choice, it's actually a really good choice. We just literally got back from 2 weeks with them doing a shakedown trip on those vehicles, and they performed flawlessly. I mean, we did 3,000 kilometers, 2,700 miles across the American Midwest, on road, off road, and they were perfect. Did exactly as they said on the tin, and there we go. So that's why they're choosing those vehicles. They then, when they get to the more challenging terrain, that's when they go into very specific vehicles that are designed for that.
Let's talk about the very specific
website to kind of get an understanding. Arctic trucks are synonymous. That's my passion brand. I was around them in Iceland when I lived there for 2 years. Emil and the team in Arctic Trucks Iceland are phenomenal. They're super smart people, but they're proven in their pedigree. So Arctic Trucks are the only rubber track vehicles outside the Amelias that have driven both poles multiple times by almost all of these people that are on this expedition. So they're modified for this trip, 150s and 350s, I think it is, 4x4 and 6x6 on what they call 44-inch balloon tires to give them a greater footprint so they have less chance of punching deeper into the snow. The Amelias, the reason why those vehicles are being used for the very tip of northern Canada and into the Arctic is because they needed to spec a vehicle that could float. And the Amelias float as well.
So is that like what's the word I'm trying to think?
But way bigger, way better.
Right.
Way more.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's very few of them. I think they've only built 6 in the entirety of.
So for our listeners, if you go to transcar.com, that's the website for the expedition. I've been following them along there, and it's really interesting. I mean, there's a recovery that they had to do of one of the Fords up in the Yukon, I believe, that broke through the ice, and that was quite interesting. And it's a real mix of people. Like say, there's some Russians in there, there's Canadians. It's a really neat, but these guys are all, passionate and experienced as well. I mean, to put it together a team to do this, these people, everybody's got to be on the game.
You look at Alex Abramov. I think he's the president of the Seven Summits organization. So he's an Everest guide. He's been to the top of Everest multiple times. Vasily Alagan, he's the guy who designed the Amelias. ACP, Andrew Comrie, he's a classic explorer Canadian. Vasily Chagnovsky, he's been to Everest. I mean, there's it's a hallowed halls, or it's a group of people who really fit in places like the Explorers Club or the Royal Geographic Society. They're the real deal, real proper explorers. But they're fantastic, just normal human beings. They're great.
Yeah, I was looking through as I started following this, and I came across. I didn't even know how I came across it by accident. Like say, probably about a year ago or 8 months, and it's just like, okay, I recognize some of these names, and sure enough, I Google them, and I'm like, okay, these guys are the real deal, right? So, but yeah, definitely go to transglobalcar.com. It's got pictures of the vehicles, the amphibious rigs, the Arctic trucks. Like you say, there's some 4x4, there's some 6x6, and then of course the Ford Expedition. But you know what? In reality, I think it's actually not a bad idea. When you look at everybody doing people that go through Africa or through Australia, quite often people are running no larger than a 33-inch tire. They're usually running a tall, narrow tire. And they're more concerned about having the basics on board for survival and, of course, a winch or whatever, just to be on the safe side. But they're not running the 38s that, is most common. One of the more common sizes seems to be in 37 to 38s in North America, right? So
the tire size is a very North American thing. It's really, really apparent when you travel. I mean, right now, Scott Brady, amazing traveler, very well known individual in the industry. I mean, kind of one of the fathers, really. He's out right now with the Ineos Grenadier going through Africa, and that's a stock Grenadier with just a couple of little pieces on there with some creature comforts. But it's a vehicle out of a French factory by an English company on whatever size tires they are, 33s on there.
85 on my Tacoma, which is basically a narrow 33. And it's surprising that where that vehicle can go, especially with that rear locker. But it also goes to the point of, being a good driver and knowing your vehicle as well. And all these people on this expedition are good drivers. And that just goes back to your guys' involvement with it too, right? And your guys' involvement in the industry overall, right? So
and it goes with anything. I think as long as you're out there enjoying yourself, as long as you're out there being safe, as long as you're out there respecting the environment, treading lightly, being kind to the people you pass by, it really doesn't matter what vehicle you have, as long as you're happy in what you're in, as long as you're happy in the aspect of the style of driving you want to do, whether it's mud bogging or rock crawling or exploring or adventuring, or literally just taking the kids to a nice campsite to go paddleboarding with them for the weekend. Doesn't matter what you have, really. I mean, I have a Defender 90 on 32s, no electronics, no lockers, and apart from its like standard factory fit center locker, and I drive it in many places a lot of these bigger cars and can go.
So having said that, people often ask, what should my first mod be? And my answer is quite often a full tank of gas and a map app on your phone or a map app on your vehicle. What else would you recommend for somebody's first modifications to a vehicle?
Oh gosh, I could be really cliche. So I think there's a couple of ways I could answer this. So forgive me for what I do for a living, but honestly, one of my recommendations, and this is not a pitch for employment or work, is talk to someone or get some education. Talk to someone who works in the industry and can give you a really good, proper answer. Not an answer that is an opinionated answer, if that makes sense. Yep. That being said, there's resources out there. The Four-Wheel Drive Association of BC is absolutely fantastic. There's great shops within BC or across Canada or across North America. But just enthusiasts can be a great source of information. If you were to push me into a corner and say, what would I do first? And I had to do something to my vehicle, probably tires.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean bigger tires. I think people, in my opinion, move too quickly into wanting to modify a vehicle. If that's the path you want to go to and that's what makes you happy, absolutely, I support and endorse that. But what I think is really good is drive your vehicle stock, the way it came from the factory, with maybe a slightly better set of tires, and understand the capability of that car. Modern cars can do amazing things right out the gate before you even touch them. I mean, look at the Ford Bronco. It comes on 35s now. You look at the Jeep Rubicon. That comes on 35s as well. You can come, the Grenadier is on 32.8s or 33s. You can drive those cars into amazing places. Honestly, if you do that, you'll be a better driver in the long run. And you will probably spend less money on fixing your vehicle because you've started with the core skills with the vehicle as it is stock, if that makes sense.
I had to kind of laugh. You probably saw me smiling and laughing because I don't know how many times have you heard me say that, Trisha, over the past year. I wish everybody would drive their vehicle stock for the first 6 months, learn the vehicle, learn your capabilities, and improve your capabilities and your vehicle in time. But so many people go out and they'll put 37-inch tires on a Rubicon and go for it, which is, I mean, if they want to do that, great. But I definitely agree that going out there and learning your vehicle and your capabilities for sure is right. So it's just, it's kind of funny because I was kind of chuckling to myself that I'm sure Trisha has heard me say this many times over the last year. So I'm glad that I have the same opinion that an expert does. So,
well, that's it. But like I said, as long as you're having fun, as long as you're being safe, as long as you're being kind to the environment.
100%.
Just
100%.
What makes you happy? But I advocate for less is more to start with, or less is more overall, really.
Yeah, and I agree too with both of you guys. I did that with my Jeep. I drove it stock. I wheeled it almost every weekend. I think the first 2 years that I had it bone stock. And just to see like, okay, what am I really getting into?
Yeah, exactly.
What is my Jeep capable of? It's my first Jeep too, so I didn't know. So I think going with like our kind of off-road association here is what I did, and kind of learned from them and kind of, did all the trails with them. And I went from there, and I just see, okay, this is what I want. This is where I can go. This is what I can do. And went from there. I definitely was, I think I kind of learned from the experts too, Wes.
The other interesting part is that a vehicle manufacturer spends millions upon millions upon millions of dollars testing and researching and engineering their vehicles to be the most efficient, to be the safest, to do the job that they expect to do. Anytime you start modifying your vehicle, it's a tricky pathway to maintain that level of safety, that level of efficiency. Everything has an equal and opposite reaction. So it's not just a case of going to the store and buying all these parts and putting it on. You need to take a little bit of time and do some due diligence. Bigger tires, you might need to do some re-gearing, but then do you weaken the drivetrain? There's all these sacrifices and benefits and disadvantages that you make when you modify your vehicle. That's why I'm a big advocate of stuff.
And a lot of people don't think about brakes, for example. Going from a tire that's, say, 31 inches tall from the factory, going on, throwing a lift on, going to a 35 or a 37-inch tire, they don't realize what happens to the braking system when you add on that extra weight, and it's actually extra rotational weight as well, too, right? So there's just so many things that it does change, right? So speaking of that, this talking about stock vehicles, you got your stock Land Rover, and then you got this big gold Ford that is a monster.
Nice
isn't
try.
it a Ford? It's a Dodge, isn't it? No?
It is, yeah. It's
okay.
a Dodge.
Okay. I was going by memory. Sorry.
I knew you were going to pin this on me. So I have a XL, and that's a Dodge Ram 3500 high output on 40s by AEV, American Expedition Vehicles. There's a reason I have that. The places that we travel for work and the loads that we tow sometimes requires a bigger vehicle. Does it need to be that big? No, not necessarily. But it's done by a manufacturer and an upfitter that works directly with the vehicle manufacturer, so everything's warranted and within the vehicle specs and safety specs. The reason it's bigger is that vehicle spends a lot of its time at a variety of industrial work sites where smaller vehicles are either not allowed or not encouraged due to less mass, less visibility, and what have you. So it's a vehicle that's built for a whole variety of reasons. The greatest joy I get, though, I love driving the thing. It's fantastic. It just eats miles across the US and Canada, but I get the biggest joy driving off-road is back in my little old 1996 diesel, underpad, noisy, smelly, leaky Defender. But it's kind of nice to get into a bigger vehicle and be comfortable and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's why that vehicle's built.
Last week, we interviewed KC250 from YouTube, and he's got the 840 horsepower Demonator Gladiator. Yeah. And he's like, why do they do all these mods? Because I can, and it's fun to drive.
That's it. Like I said, as long as you've got a smile on your face, as long as you're doing something that makes you happy, as long as you're not trashing the environment and hurting anyone else, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. So, going to name drop a couple of people that I know you work with. First of all, my good friend Richard Sheridan from Freedom
Mhm.
Recovery Gear. Richard and you have been working together. He's been to a lot of the expos with you or working for
Yeah.
you. And great guy, stand-up guy, one of my favorite people. The only complaint I got is I never get to go wheeling with him because he's always traveling the world with you.
He is a phenomenal chap. He's probably one of the most talented people in Canada in this industry. I would put him right
Yep.
up there as one of the very best instructors in Canada, if not North America. I think he's very underrated by a lot of people, but he's quiet, he's humble, he makes amazing recovery equipment, hand built in Canada. And he works through myself and for himself in a lot of industry. So he's put a lot of time and effort to do a really, really stand up job. Huge kudos to the guy.
Definitely. Yeah. Freedom Recovery Gear. Check it out online, guys. It's all made in Canada, the ropes and everything like that. And he's got some other gear as well. But the only thing I don't like about wheeling with Richard is when it comes to doing, somebody does get stuck, he wants to do it all safe and proper and stuff like that. Kudos to the guys. I mean, he's told me some really neat stuff when we've been out wheeling and somebody's been stuck, and it's like, sometimes he'll just sit back and watch us talk about it. And then he'll say, well, why not do this? And it's like, we never thought about that kind of idea, right? And so it truly is a pleasure going out with him sometimes and just learning from him, and not in the classroom learning kind of idea, just hanging out as friends and him, like I say, quite often he'll just listen to us and us talk about our idea, how to do the recovery. And then he'll come up with some incredible idea that nobody even considered. So he's definitely top quality for sure. Another name I'm going to name drop is Adam Gill from Adams Off-Road in Langley, BC. He's done a few courses with you guys for his customers and that. And we interviewed Adam back at the end of July, I think it was. For those folks who have not heard it, go back, listen to it. Adam's a great guy. He's a true blue, just work hard and make his customers happy. And I know you guys have done some recovery courses with him, as well as West Coast Off-Roaders. And they're in North Van, I think, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, both really, really good friends of ours. We like what they do. We like what they stand for. We like how they operate. Lots of other great folks out there doing similar things, but those two are our standouts, and we have a relationship both professionally and as friends. And we do a little bit different work between the two of them. West Coast Off-Roaders is more long-term trip or bigger trips. And then Adam at this stage is clinics for mechanics and vehicle recovery, that kind of stuff, all recreation based.
Right.
But super, super, super nice folks.
Yeah, definitely, highly recommend both those shops for work and repairs and accessories on the West Coast anyways. And of course, they will ship all over the place. Now, you guys have been to Overland North, like I mentioned earlier, and that's where you met Trisha. And that was your first foray into the Ontario Overland market, right? Or
recreation, yes.
Yes.
We operate across Canada industrially and have done for several years. So there's a variety of projects. Some I can't speak about out west just because of confidentiality, but we teach in a variety of places over there already, Ontario, Quebec, and a handful of other places. But in terms of recreation, Overland, Nth, and that team, fantastic group of people. We will be back with them. There's lots of planning in the background that's already taken place. There's some new things, new exciting stories and opportunities coming. So I can't wait to get back out there with some of the team or send the team out there to enjoy those opportunities.
Yeah, definitely a great event. And I've caught wind of a few things that are coming up just through them and stuff like that. And 2024 is going to be a hell of a year for Overland North. That's all I can say. So,
yes, it is.
But you totally led into my next question. You guys do a lot of industrial training.
Okay, yeah.
What's that all about? What do you got going on with that?
Well, so that's our core part of the business, really. So we deliver training from light to medium heavy duty vehicles. So the pickups through to the bigger industrial vehicles, snowmobile, snowcat, ATV, ORV, side-by-side, anything to do with off-highway driving, although we have a sector of the business that deals with things like winter driving or driver assessments and similar associated skills. So really, we're the leader in the industry looking at driver safety in the workplace or operator safety in the workplace. So anything to do with your vehicle, be it the use of the vehicle or the machine, the recovery of it, the driving skills, the psychology, the risk assessment, the safe operating procedures, the relationship with OSHA, WorkSafe BC, the organizations that mandate worker safety. That's the field that we sit in. We deliver training all over the world in that aspect. I mean, myself this year alone, many trips to the US for training across Canada, most of the provinces so far this year for myself, Morocco, Wales, the UK, all sorts of places. So it's pretty broad and diverse. We then work with the film industry, providing drivers, providing access, support, photo shoots, that kind of stuff. We work with vehicle manufacturers, ride and drive events, consumer events, press events, all sorts. Equipment testing, we have a couple of companies that we're working in direct relationship that are looking at use case scenarios, evaluating very specialist pieces of machinery for very specialist pieces of job. Yeah, it's pretty diverse and interesting. So we have 18 instructors right now who are based all over the place and travel all over North America and further afield. And then I have access to a phenomenal set of other instructors through the Overland Expo team and a variety of other private and professional instructors. So it's pretty diverse.
Sounds like you got everything going on. It's mind-boggling. You mentioned earlier off air that we're sitting at October, whatever we are, 3rd or something like that, and you have 15 more flights booked this year.
That's just for me, let alone the staff. So that's what have I got going on? Me individually, Overland Expo East. I fly there tomorrow. Then there's the Rebelle Rally. Then SEMA. A trip to UK for a partnership that we have in the UK that's looking at some opportunities there. There's potentially a scout to Saudi Arabia. There's New York. I mean, the list goes on.
Wow.
And that's all before January the 1st. But that's okay.
Now, one of the things that I find quite interesting is a lot of us older folks like myself, I don't know, 51 or 52 or something like that. And I've been doing four-wheeling since I was 4 years old, kind of idea, right? I grew up in it. And there's a lot of people like myself and are even younger, they're 30 years old, but have been doing it for years. And we all think we know what we're doing, but we've just kind of learned it through hard luck and trial kind of idea, right? And so I think pretty good driver in that. But I know that when I've been out with Richard and we've talked about stuff, and it's stuff that like I mentioned earlier, that I'd never considered when I'm doing a recovery or when I'm doing driving and stuff like that. So I think taking a course with, whether it be yourself or through a local organization like the Four-Wheel Drive Association of BC or the Ontario Federation, they've got, I know, newbie days and stuff like that. I think that is key to anybody getting out there, and we can all learn something, whether it be a brand new driver, whether it be an old dog like myself. Going in with an open mind, we can all learn something. One thing that I find a lot of people are not good at is spotting. So I think part of that sometimes is the communication, have one person, don't have five people yelling things. I think that is probably the most confusing thing that you can do to a driver. Just pick one person and you deal with that one person and go from there. But what other tips can you give people in regards to the spotting world?
Oh gosh, we can go down many ways, and you can have half the viewers agreeing and disagreeing here real quick. We base our spotting signals based from what we do in industry. We try and keep everything really simple and straightforward. Those signals that we use are really familiar in the off-road industry. We're big advocates of making sure that there's a pre-plan in advance of you needing the spotting. So it's like, hey, Trisha, we're going to negotiate this piece of terrain. Where would you like me to be? How can I help you? The relationship has to start before you need the spotting. If you start that relationship, the relationship is usually successful. If it's reactionary or yelling or shouting or not being positioned in the right place, you're not setting yourself up for success. The other part to it is, us as a training company, we have the ways that we advocate through in relationship with what we do in the workplace through regulation. But what we really want to give across in our messaging is that it doesn't need to be stuffy. It doesn't need to be rigid. It doesn't need to be rule-based. Ultimately, as long as you and your group and the individuals involved understand how you're spotting and what you're saying and what you're doing and how you're communicating, it's you and your group. That's the way it matters. It doesn't have to be the way that we define it should be. As long as you understand together, that's the most important part. Yep. There's things like, I'm not a fan of shouting driver passenger, but if that's the way you do it, sure. If that's what gets you through the trail and makes you happy and it's safe, that's great. Yep. I've said it a couple of times on this discussion. As long as you're not hurting anyone, as long as you're not damaging the environment, and as long as you're not disrupting other people, if you decide to spot one way, who cares? We have our preferred way for sure.
Yeah.
I think in a short answer, pre-communication, understand what you're talking about beforehand.
I watched a YouTube video, I don't know, probably about a month or so ago, and I'm like, I want this guy spotting for me. I don't know whose video it was. I can't remember, but he did exactly that. They went to the vehicle and said, okay, I'm going to stand over here. If you can't see me, let me know before you start. And you're going to go this way, to the driver's side. And then we're going to want to make you do a real hard right. And you're going to go up on this rock and then go from there. And they talked about it beforehand. And I'm just like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. And sure enough, they did it through. And as he's talking to the person, he's like, okay, now your left tire is going to start to come down and the vehicle's going to come down and you're going to feel a bit of a tip or something along that lines, right? And I'm like, okay, this guy's communicated. I want this guy spotting for me because he knows what he's doing. And I was so impressed with the guy.
Yeah, that's it. And being spotted or being guided through an obstacle or terrain or a situation is not meant to be stressful. The spotter's there to try and reduce the stress level and increase the success rate of what you're trying to achieve. I mean, I have a whole handful of folks I trust. I mean, there's a handful of people from the Land Rover world, professional Land Rover instructors, are kind of my mentors, really. People from the Camel Trophy, Bob Burns and Fred Monzes, Jim Sweat, Jim West, Daphne Green, the whole North American team there, Duncan Barber, Sarah Batten from the UK. The way that they educate people and the way that they guide people through terrain is like magic. It's very calm. It's very gentle.
Yep.
Sometimes you almost don't need the discussion. If I pull up on Fred and he's giving me a spotting command, I don't even need to think. I don't even need to question it because it's about trust. The trust is the most fundamental part of this. And in reality, if I'm unsure, hey, Fred, it kind of feels a little funny. Just stop and have a conversation for a second. If the vehicle's stopped, not going anywhere, and no throttle's been applied, there's no reason it should get damaged, the environment should get damaged, or you should get any more stuck or in a worse position. If in doubt, stop. Have a conversation.
Definitely. It's funny, Trisha, I see you nodding through this whole thing and agreeing. And I know that you've been, over the last 4 or 5 years, your experience is you've gone from a new driver to somebody that is quite experienced. And you started helping out on some of these ladies' runs and you started spotting some of these ladies. Yep. And I see you sitting there nodding your head, agreeing with pretty much everything that we've been saying. So it's,
I agree. Like, communication is probably, and having that sense of just like Chris said, like the ease and just the calmness. So, like, people tell me I'm very calm. I get really excited when they do go through obstacle. Like, I'm like, yay! I'm like shouting, but I think communication and just putting someone at ease. And for me, also, I do like to do that too, Wes, that kind of spotting where I'm like, your driver's going down, your passenger's going, this is what's happening. And also, I do like to get my girls out of the vehicle and looking at the terrain, looking, where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself going? This is where this is my line I usually take. And then I kind of like, this is where you're going to go. Can you see yourself going up? Do you see where your tires can be placed? Do you see that? So, and then they're like, oh, when I get back in my vehicle, I can sit there and I'm visualizing where I'm going. And you get more of that confidence of like, I know where I'm going. I can picture it. So that puts a lot of at ease as well. And that's how I learned. So I'm like, why don't I bring that onto like what I like to do too, right? So yeah, it's just
that's absolutely perfect. That's music to my ears. I love that kind of attitude and that way that you approach things. You learn so much from being outside of the vehicle, just as much from driving the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Being a passenger and getting out and watching tires change in traction levels, watching suspension work, watching line choice, even just the difference in just a tiny bit of steering can make the difference between success and failure. But you can only gain that knowledge by sometimes being in the car, sometimes being outside the car. I've learned more from watching other people and watching other vehicles than probably being in a vehicle.
Yep, definitely. I got to say, kudos to you, Trisha, because I know that you work with a lot of newer drivers, and that also doing it in a calming manner is huge to building their confidence and making them calm. So it takes a special person, I think, to be training new people. Now, having said that, what do you find, Chris? What makes a good trainer? You obviously worked with a lot of trainers over the years, and a lot of different personalities as well, too.
Yeah, I'm very defined on what I look for in a trainer. I mean, it comes from my background from learning how to be an educator, learning how to teach people to be educators. Humility is one of the biggest aspects I look at. The ability to be flexible. We have some very defined pathways and some very defined strategies that we teach. But bring it back to a question or a comment that you said a short while ago, is that can't teach an old dog new tricks. A lot of the places that we'll end up going to provide education, you may have oil workers or foresters who've been in the industry for a long time. For me, we need instructors, or we use instructors that have the ability to recognize those skills and experiences and those different attitudes and personalities. And it's just as much the ability to recognize and be respectful to that, but then guide them in a way that makes them feel empowered and respected and open to learning something new throughout that period of that course. That's a really big skill. The other part that I look for was all of our instructors are industry experience, and that's really, really key. There's some phenomenal recreational instructors out there. I mean, the volunteers at the Four Wheel Drive Association are absolutely amazing. They put in lots of their own time to give people really great opportunities. And you have to start somewhere in your teaching background. We use people that have a teaching background, but also because of the nature of the places that we teach, they have to have this industry background as well to support it. Because I can't send someone into a workplace who has no concept of what a 200-ton or a 300-ton rock truck does. If we're teaching in that environment, they need to have that kind of that education or that understanding of those places. So there's a handful of things that I look for. So respect, humility, education, experience, training, but correct training through the right organizations that are relevant to what we're trying to achieve.
One thing, just going back to actually doing and participating in that training course that we did at the Overland North. One thing that, and I'm like, we're always learning. We're always learning. But one thing I did take away from that I started to do more of myself, which I haven't done before, is vehicle maintenance and inspection before going out and after. And just like having that, look at your vehicle, know your vehicle, see what's leaking, what's moving. That was like a really big piece that I took away from that training. And I even do it regularly just because, I'm in the city and who knows what would happen. But that was just something that I really enjoyed. And I think having more of those types of training and courses available for people who want to overland or off-road and whatnot is so good. It's like, we should know, right? We should know, like, if I could get stuck or if I get something's wrong with my Jeep, hey, I can probably fix it because I know what's going on or I know where I'm looking.
No, that's it. And in reality, we don't advocate for people necessarily being at a mechanic level, but we advocate for people to understand your own vehicle, to understand to where to look for the information if you don't know the answer, like your owner's manual. But every time you go out on the trail or every time you go out on a significant journey, 3 to 5 to 10 minutes worth of looking over your vehicle can save a whole lot of heartache or time lost down the road. I mean, modern vehicles these days are fantastic. They're reliable. They're easy to maintain. Yes, they're more complicated with some of the electronic systems, but a quick look over and inspection of your vehicle might save you that heartache down the road. I mean, one of our relationships or partnerships is with Adventure Smart, the Search and Rescue Association's kind of outreach organization that's based here in BC. So many resources on a platform like that gives you the idea of how to prepare for your journey. The bigger picture is if you can take a few minutes to look after your vehicle, hopefully that'll reduce the chance of something happening out there. With vehicle travel these days, you can get so far into the wilderness so quickly and get away from communication really, really fast. What we're trying to help encourage people to do is do those pre-trips, be prepared so that you can be self-sufficient and that you're less draw on the likes of search and rescue. I mean, search and rescue calls these days have, I don't know the number, quadrupled over the last 5 years, let's say.
Wow.
And that's sometimes no fault of people's own. People have genuine instances, and that's why search and rescue are there. But some of these instances can be avoided by a little bit of preparation. And you have to remember that these search and rescue folks, they give their own time for free, often at the detriment to themselves and to their families and stuff. So just a few minutes of your time can help reduce that and make you a little safer.
Definitely. And I highly recommend people check out the Adventure Smart website. All kinds of information on there. It's adventuresmart.ca. I've been to it quite a few times myself, just sort of looking at updates and stuff like that. And they have all kinds of information on there, whether you're a hiker, a mountain biker, four-wheeler guy, whatever. There's all kinds. And you know, I'm actually glancing at it right now. And one of the first things that pop up on their homepage is trip planning, where every adventure starts and ends. And they go through and talk about trip planning and how to properly trip plan. But there's so much information on there. They've got an app. I haven't tried their app before, but I have been to their website quite a bit, adventuresmart.ca. Lots of info on there. So
the app is fantastic. Leaving that trip plan is really good. I mean, with the evolution of things like Starlink and satellite communications, it's easier to communicate in the backcountry, but have a backup plan for when that stuff doesn't work. I have Starlink, I have a satellite phone, I have a variety of other devices. Be prepared, be smart. Actually, we wrote a whole bunch of stuff for the Adventure Smart website in our relationship with them. So it's a really good resource, be it hiking, canoeing, kayaking, not just off-road.
Everything. Yeah. So once again, we're talking to Chris from Overland Training Canada. You can check out the website at overlandtrainingcanada.com, as well as on the socials like Instagram and Facebook at Overland Training Canada. Once again, Chris, I want to really thank you for taking the time out of your super busy schedule. I know you're bouncing all over the place, but it's been really interesting talking to you. And I'm pretty sure that we'll sit around a campfire at the BC Overland Rally next year and share a beer and stuff like that.
100%.
So our last question we ask all of our guests is, what Canadian would you like to listen to on the 4x4 Canada podcast?
Oh gosh, there's some great people out there. I've got 3 people. I'm going to give you them. It doesn't matter the order, but Ray Highland. You have to talk to Ray. We can hook that up for you, no problem. His stories of travel and adventures, especially with his family and his old Series 1 Land Rover recreating the London to Singapore trip, that is staggering. We did a trip up to the Arctic with him as a first. That was hilarious. Dan Grett.
Ray. Yes, Dan Grech. I did meet him at the Overland Rally, and it's funny. Ray, him and his wife, are organizer of the BC Overland Rally, and Dan Grech was at the Overland Rally. And have you heard of Dan Grech, Trisha?
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. I've known him for many, many, many years. And then the other one is ACP, Andrew Comrie, Picard.
Though all 3 of those are on my list for sure, and I might have to name drop you on them. Trip to Singapore and in the first series Land Cruiser or Land Rover. Sorry, Land Cruiser. What an insult that is to the Land Rover boys, eh?
Land Cruisers are amazing cars in their own right as well, though.
Yes. But yeah, him and his wife traveling with the kids from England to Singapore, I believe it was, right? And,
correct. I think it was a 57 series. Ray's a very close friend of mine. He's phenomenal. And they basically did nothing. That's true overlanding. The five of them sat in that car across like half the globe. I don't want to tell too many stories because it's a story. But
that's his story to tell.
He fixed it with like old leather hats and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, he's definitely a good person to talk to, and he's got so many fun stories from all over the place.
Yeah, definitely. And Dan Grech roadshows me. He's been around the world,
One of the most accomplished solo travelers out there. Absolutely.
Trish, I actually got a really good idea for a Christmas gift for you with his book. He's got a couple of books out now. And for those people that are looking for Christmas ideas, Dan Grech roadshows me. I think he's got 3 books out now. I might be wrong. It's at least 2, I think.
Yeah.
But he drove from Alaska down to Argentina in a stock Jeep TJ, I believe it was at that time. And he slept out. He didn't have a rooftop tent. He didn't have any of that. He just slept on the back. No, it was just on 31-inch tires. And then he traveled across Africa in another rig, and he's been around Australia. And now he's building his 3rd rig. He's actually here in BC, or he was in BC for a while. His better half is a Canadian lady, and they've been working on building up this last rig to do some more traveling. So he gave a really great talk at the BC Overland Rally that one night. Yeah. It was really interesting. So, and then ACP, yes, I got to talk with ACP. That guy is Andrew Comrie Picard, and we talked about him on the TransGlobal Car event, and really interesting individual for sure. So
yeah, he's a blast, super smart guy, done lots of interesting stuff. I'll see him with TransGlobal again in New York in the new year.
Yeah, that's good. That's such an exciting trip. That's just mind blowing to me. Awesome. Yep. Thanks again, Chris. And I want to thank you for coming out. We'll let you go get some dinner now. And before I do go, I just want to remind everybody to click the subscribe or follow on your podcast app. We got some really cool stuff coming up. Next week, we've got John O'Donnell from Ontario. He's used to race a early Ford Bronco in short course racing in the 80s. And he's got all kinds of off-road racing stories. And then after that, we've got Ian McKenzie from Bright Source Lights coming on board. And we're working with a couple other guys. Chris Arell, we're just finalizing a new schedule with him from Monster Spectacular. Probably the best monster truck show in Canada, especially the Montreal one that just happened at the end of September. The Montreal show with Monster Spectacular is awesome because it's such a huge arena and excellent show. We got some other off-road races coming up. We got some YouTube people coming up. So click the like and subscribe and let your friends know all about it because we got some really cool stuff coming up in the future here. So awesome, Chris. I really want to thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you, Chris.
My pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your evening, guys.
You hit